On the coldest night Aspen Ridge had seen in years, a U.S. Marine returned to his cabin after days in the wilderness, only to spot a small figure collapsed on his doorstep. A 6-year-old girl, frozen, exhausted, clutching a pink backpack as if it were her last lifeline. She had walked alone through the storm, searching for the one person who never missed a promise, her mother, a night shift worker who hadn't come home. The Marine lifted the child into his arms, unaware that saving her was only the beginning, that the truth waiting inside that factory and the bond forming in that cabin would change all 3 of their lives forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, hit subscribe so you never miss another tale of courage, faith, and miracles. The winter storm pressed against the mountains like a living thing, turning the forest into a world of white silence. Sergeant Mason Hale, a 36-year-old U.S. Marine Corps infantryman, guided his Jeep through the winding trail leading to his isolated cabin deep in the woods of Aspen Ridge, Colorado. After 3 days assisting with high-altitude cold-weather training at Camp Whitford, he was exhausted. His broad shoulders slumped slightly from fatigue, his short black hair dusted with melting snowflakes, and his square-cut jaw tightened from the dull ache that never left his right temple, a lingering reminder of a roadside blast during his second deployment overseas. His face carried the rugged tiredness of a man who had seen too much, and the trimmed stubble along his jawline added to his hardened exterior. Yet beneath the harsh lines was a quiet steadiness, a man who had spent years learning to mask worry beneath discipline. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Atlas, his 5-year-old German Shepherd canine partner. Atlas was a powerful animal with thick amber-toned fur, alert posture, intelligent dark eyes, and a protective temperament sharpened by training and service. He had been assigned to Mason 2 years earlier, after the dog's previous handler was medically discharged. Since then, the two had developed a bond forged by trust, danger, and countless patrols. Mason often joked privately that Atlas understood him better than most humans ever had. The dog sensed moods instinctively, responding to changes in Mason's breathing or tension before Mason could voice anything. Tonight, Atlas sat tensely, ears flicking at the howling wind, the way he always did when something felt off. Mason's cabin came into view through the swirl of snow, a small wooden structure, warm light glowing through frosted windows, icicles hanging like frozen knives along the roof. Usually, stepping onto its porch meant safety, silence, and warmth after days of rigid military routine. But as the Jeep rolled into the clearing and the headlights swept across the front steps, Mason felt Atlas stiffen before he even saw it. The dog let out a sudden sharp bark, not aggressive, but alarmed. Mason's instincts, sharpened by a decade and a half as a Marine, switched on instantly. His tiredness evaporated. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the dark form just barely visible on the steps. It wasn't moving. It was small, too small. "Atlas, stay," he ordered, but his voice shook, betraying a fear he didn't fully understand yet. He threw open the Jeep door, the icy wind slicing across his face like glass shards. Atlas bounded out anyway, ignoring the command, racing through the snow toward the still form. Mason followed, boots sinking deep in the fresh powder, breath clouding violently in the frigid air. When he reached the porch, his heart jolted so hard it almost knocked the breath from his lungs. It was a child, a little girl, 6 years old. At most, lay collapsed on the wooden step, curled in on herself as though she had fought the cold until the final moment. Her limbs were thin and stiff, her knees scraped from where she had fallen. She wore only a thin pink dress, tattered at the hem and soaked through with snow. Her chestnut brown hair was tangled and crusted with icy flakes, and her skin had turned a terrible shade between blue and white. Her lips, once soft and rosy, were now purple. Her tiny pink backpack lay beside her, half buried in snow, a frozen clasp sticking to the wood. "Oh, God," Mason breathed, dropping to his knees beside her. Atlas whined softly, circling, every part of him alert and anxious. Mason touched the girl's cheek. It was like touching ice. Panic stabbed through his chest. Memories flashed through his mind, carrying wounded children out of collapsed homes overseas, the helplessness he felt seeing fragile lives fade because help had come too late. Tonight, here on his own porch, That old fear returned with brutal force. "No, no, sweetheart. Stay with me," he murmured, slipping his arms beneath her weightless body. He could feel how dangerously cold she had become. Her breath was so shallow it was barely perceptible. He pushed into the cabin, kicking the door shut behind him. Heat from the wood-burning stove washed over them, but Mason knew passive warmth wouldn't be enough. He laid her gently near the hearth on a thick wool rug, grabbed 2 heavy blankets from the couch, and wrapped her tightly. Atlas settled close, pressing his warm body against her feet, a trained instinct to share heat with distressed humans. Minutes felt painfully long. Mason knelt beside the girl, rubbing her arms and hands to stimulate circulation, checking her airway again and again. His mind churned with fear, frustration, and questions. Who was she? How far had she walked? Where were her parents? Why was she alone in a blizzard? Her eyelashes fluttered. Mason froze. Her lips parted, and a faint whisper escaped, so soft he almost missed it. Mommy didn't come home." Mason leaned closer. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" His voice softened, losing its military edge. "You're safe now. I've got you." Her eyes opened slightly, big, hazel, frightened, and glazed with exhaustion. When she looked at him, Mason felt the impact like a physical blow. Children weren't supposed to look like that, struggling between hope and surrender. He forced himself to breathe steadily. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. He switched into survival mode the same way he had during missions. "What's your name?" he pressed gently. "Lily," she whispered, barely audible. "Lily Carter." A name, a thread of identity. It grounded him. "And your mom? Where is she?" The girl blinked slowly, a tear forming on her lashes before freezing. "She works at the place with the big lights, the one with loud bells. Machines? Silver Pine." Her voice cracked. "She didn't come home, so I went to find her." Mason felt something inside him twist sharply, a mixture of anger, fear, and protective instinct. Silver Pine manufacturing plant, 10 miles away, dangerous roads, long night shifts. He knew the place. His closest friend, Travis Owens, worked there as a shift supervisor. Travis was 34, tall and narrow-shouldered, with sandy brown hair always tied back, a freckled face, and a habit of chewing gum when stressed. A kind-hearted man, loyal to a fault, but overworked and often caught between management pressure and worker safety. Travis was the type who tried to help everyone but sometimes drowned under the weight of it. If Lily's mother worked there and hadn't returned home, something was wrong, very wrong. Mason's pulse hammered. He wrapped another blanket around Lily. "Lily, listen to me," he said slowly, firmly. "I'm going to help you find your mom, I promise. But first, I need to keep you warm. You were outside too long." "Will she be okay?" Lily's small hand clutched his uniform sleeve. The question hit him in the chest. He swallowed. "I'm going to do everything I can," he said honestly. He glanced at Atlas, who stood rigid, ears perked, as if he too sensed the urgency. Mason inhaled deeply, forcing clarity into his thoughts. He needed to think like a Marine again, quick, precise, decisive. He lifted Lily carefully, blankets and all, and set her on the couch near the fire. The warmth had begun returning color to her cheeks. Good, but she was still dangerously weak. He checked the clock. Almost midnight, roads covered, temperatures dropping fast. If something had happened to Lily's mother at the plant, she could be injured, unconscious, or worse. And Lily had walked alone through a blizzard to find her. What kind of desperation pushed a child to do that? Mason ran a hand over his face, feeling the grit of exhaustion and the sting of mounting rage at whatever failure had left a child wandering in deadly weather. He rose to his feet, resolve settling over him like armor. "Atlas," he said quietly. The dog snapped to attention. "We're going out again." He looked back at Lily, small and fragile under the blankets, her breathing shallow but steady. No more hesitation. He grabbed his coat, checked his Jeep keys, and stepped toward the door, the storm's roar waiting on the other side. He didn't know what he would find at Silver Pine, but he knew one thing. He wasn't leaving Lily's mother out there alone, not tonight, not ever. And as he opened the door, the wind howled through the trees as if warning him that the night was far from done. The snowstorm thickened around Aspen Ridge, as if the night itself wanted to swallow the world whole. The forest loomed in shifting shades of black and white, and the long industrial road leading toward the Silver Pine manufacturing plant stretched ahead like a frozen artery pulsing through the wilderness. Sergeant Mason Hale tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his Jeep as he sped down the icy path, headlights cutting into the storm's relentless veil. In the back seat, 6-year-old Lily Carter lay wrapped in a thick blanket, small hands gripping the fabric tightly as though it were the only thing anchoring her to safety. Atlas sat beside her, massive amber-coated body curled protectively against the girl's side, his sharp eyes flicking toward her every few seconds. He sensed danger in the child's trembling breaths long before Mason had even driven halfway down the mountain road. Mason's jaw clenched with a force he rarely allowed himself to feel. He was trained to operate under extreme pressure, ambushes, evacuation missions, hostile terrain. But this was different. There was something profoundly fragile about the fate of one child and one mother in a world this ruthless. The fear that Lily's mother might be lying somewhere cold and alone made the Marine inside him shift into a mindset sharper than steel. He pressed the phone against his ear, trying again to reach Travis Owens, the Silver Pine shift supervisor and Mason's childhood friend. Travis was a lanky man in his mid-30s with narrow shoulders, sandy brown hair perpetually tied into a low knot, and a lightly freckled face that made him appear younger than he was. Yet he was always weighed down by too many responsibilities, often grinding his teeth unconsciously during conversations, a habit born from the pressure of keeping hundreds of workers safe under corporate demands. He was conscientious, earnest, and dependable, the kind of man who checked on injured workers personally and stayed late when someone needed help. For Travis not to answer Mason's calls in the middle of a storm? That was alarming on a level Mason couldn't dismiss. The third call rang and rang before going to voicemail. "Come on, Travis," Mason muttered, unease rippling across his features. "You never turn your damn phone off." He lowered the device, exhaling sharply. Something was wrong inside that plant. He could feel it. Lily stirred weakly in the back seat. "Is Mommy there?" she whispered, voice fragile as cracked ice. Mason glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Her hazel eyes glistened with fear and something deeper, trust. It hit Mason in the chest every time she looked at him that way, as if she believed he could fix anything. He wished he could tell her yes, that everything was fine, but he had never been the type to offer false comfort. He believed children deserved truth wrapped in strength, not lies. "We'll find her, Lily," Mason said quietly, voice steady. "I'm not leaving without her." Atlas huffed softly as if reinforcing the vow. By the time they reached the outer fence of Silver Pine Manufacturing, the storm had grown vicious. Snow blew horizontally, stinging the skin like needles. The plant's tall metal structures jutted upward into the night like skeleton ribs, and flickering fluorescent lights cast long, unnatural shadows across the loading dock. The entire facility looked abandoned, as if someone had pulled the power cord from the heart of the building. Mason frowned. Even during slow shifts, the place had life. Workers on break, security walking rounds, machines humming. Tonight, it felt like a dead zone. He pulled up to the main entrance gate where a small security booth sat half buried in snow. Inside, a middle-aged guard looked up, startled. This was Harold Brayton, a man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair, pale skin weathered from long seasons outdoors, and a potbelly pressing against his uniform jacket. He had kind eyes, but tired ones, the eyes of a man who had seen too many winters and too many workers pushed past their limits. He stepped out of the booth, blinking against the snow. "Mason, what the hell are you doing out here at this hour?" Harold called out, brushing snow off his sleeves. "Emergency," Mason said without hesitation, hoisting Lily into his arms as he stepped out of the Jeep. A worker didn't return home from the night shift, Hannah Carter. Her daughter walked through a blizzard to find her. "I need access to the plant now." Harold's expression shifted instantly from confusion to dread. "Jesus, Hannah? She's one of the good ones, always polite, always early." He hesitated, voice lowering. "There's been talk, long hours. Machines breaking down, supervisors stretched thin." Atlas barked once sharply, cutting through Harold's rambling. "Harold," Mason said, tone firm, "open the gate." The older man nodded briskly and swiped his access card, pushing the heavy metal fence open just enough for Mason to slip through with Lily and Atlas trailing closely. Inside the main building, the air felt eerily still. The overhead lights flickered inconsistently, some buzzing with low electrical hums, others failing entirely. The bitter cold seeped into the hallways. It shouldn't have been this cold inside a functioning plant. Atlas lowered his head, nose twitching, muscles tensing. "He's picking something up," Mason muttered. "Let him lead." The dog paced forward methodically, tail stiff, ears locked forward. Lily clung to Mason's shirt, whispering, "Atlas, is he scared?" "No," Mason said softly. "He's focused." Atlas pulled down hallway after hallway, past silent machinery and untouched workstations. Mason recognized the line areas. He had visited Travis here before for a safety audit. Everything seemed frozen in time, as if the shift had ended abruptly with no cleanup. An overturned mug sat beside a workstation. A jacket abandoned on a hook swayed slightly from a draft. None of it felt right. When they approached the employee break area, Atlas suddenly growled, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the corridor. Mason's entire body went cold for reasons unrelated to the storm. The break room door was shut, but a faint cold draft leaked from its edges. Mason reached for the handle. It resisted slightly before clicking open. The air inside was colder than the hallway. The vending machine lights flickered weakly, casting ghost-like glows on the floor. Lockers lined the walls, tall metal units with names scrawled in marker. Atlas moved swiftly to the last row of lockers, his growl deepening. He pressed his nose to one locker in particular, tail rigid. Mason approached, heart pounding, and tugged on the handle. Locked. "Harold!" Mason called. The guard hurried in, chest heaving. "Get me a master key." Harold fumbled through his ring of keys with trembling fingers until one slid into the lock. The door creaked open. A soft gasp escaped Lily. Inside, slumped against the back wall of the locker, was Hannah Carter, a 29-year-old woman with light brown hair tangled around her pale face, skin drenched in cold sweat, and dark circles carved beneath her closed eyes. She was slender, almost too slender, as though life had worn her down degree by degree. Her uniform shirt was wrinkled and damp, one sleeve stained with machine grease, and her arms were limp at her sides. She looked like she had simply folded into herself and faded into unconsciousness. She was breathing, but barely. "Hannah!" Mason shouted, dropping to his knees. He touched her forehead. It was cold, too cold, and damp with exhaustion. Harold's face blanched. "Good God, this is on us. She must have collapsed during a break, and no one saw." Mason ignored the guard's guilt spiraling. "Help me get her out." He maneuvered Hannah gently, lifting her with practiced precision. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, a feather of a human being worn thin by labor and neglect. Lily rushed forward, gripping her mother's limp hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mommy, Mommy, wake up, please," the little girl cried, her voice cracking. Mason could barely breathe as he carried Hannah out of the room. The cold from the hallway hit them, but he didn't slow. "Harold, clear a path to the exit, now!" The guard nodded frantically and ran ahead. Atlas stayed glued to Mason's side, barking to clear the way, tail sweeping protective arcs. Mason's thoughts raced. Hypoglycemia, severe fatigue, dehydration, all three? She needed medical care immediately, not in 20 minutes, not in 5, now. The fear he had felt for Lily earlier now doubled, pressing against his ribs like a vice. He reached the Jeep, carefully laying Hannah across the back seat. Lily curled next to her mother, still holding her hand, sobbing softly. Atlas leaped in next, positioning himself between the door and the family like a living shield. Mason slammed the door, boots crunching in the snow as he circled to the driver's seat. His breath came out in a sharp cloud. "Hold on, Hannah," he murmured under his breath. "I'm getting you to the hospital." He gripped the wheel, eyes burning with determination. As the Jeep roared into the storm, the Silver Pine plant shrank behind them, dark, silent, and full of secrets Mason intended to uncover. But for now, only one mission mattered. Hannah Carter had to reach that hospital alive. The early morning light barely pierced the thick wall of snowfall as Sergeant Mason Hale pushed through the sliding doors of Aspen Ridge Memorial Hospital, carrying Hannah Carter in his arms while little Lily clung to her mother's limp hand. The ambulance bay lights cast a pale glow over the trio, and Atlas trotted closely behind, his heavy amber fur coated in a thin layer of ice. Nurses rushed forward, pulling a stretcher toward them. Mason laid Hannah down gently, and a team of medical staff wheeled her through the double doors. Lily cried out, her voice cracking in raw desperation, and Mason quickly lifted her, holding her trembling body against his chest as he followed. Atlas, trained for public service environments, remained by Mason's heel with a disciplined but tense posture. Inside the emergency ward, the air was warm, but heavy with the familiar scent of antiseptic. Dr. Evelyn Marston, a 50-year-old woman with sharp gray eyes and short curled hair, peppered white at the roots, intercepted them. She was petite, but moved with the authority of someone who had spent decades in emergency medicine. Her thin-framed glasses sat low on a narrow nose, and faint wrinkles traced the corners of her mouth, etched by years of delivering both hope and heartbreak. Her voice was steady. "Bring her into Bay 3. What happened?" "She collapsed at an industrial plant," Mason answered. "Severe cold exposure, dehydration, exhaustion. She's been unconscious for who knows how long." The doctor's brows knitted tightly. "Get the IV running. Warm blankets, full vitals, now." The urgency in her tone made Mason's stomach coil. Lily pressed her forehead into Mason's shoulder, shivering even though she was bundled in the thick blanket he had wrapped her in earlier. Minutes stretched into agonizing silence until Dr. Marston stepped out from behind the curtain. Snow lashed angrily against the windows, but her next words were more chilling than the storm outside. If she had arrived an hour later— She shook her head, her expression turning grave. "We might not be having this conversation. She's stable for now, but she's severely hypoglycemic, dehydrated, and utterly exhausted. She'll need time." Mason exhaled slowly, tension draining only enough for him to breathe. Lily whispered, "Mommy's alive?" He nodded gently. "She is. She's fighting, and your mother is strong." Lily's lower lip quivered as she hugged him tightly, and Mason's chest tightened with a fierce protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. As he sat beside Lily in the waiting area, the hospital doors opened once more. A gust of cold wind blew in along with a familiar figure. Travis Owens, tall and lanky, his usually controlled demeanor shattered. His sandy brown hair was disheveled, tied loosely with strands sticking to his forehead. His freckled face was drained of color, and his eyes, normally warm, looked haunted. His breaths came in sharp bursts as though each inhale carried a weight he couldn't bear. "Mason! God!" Travis hurried forward, nearly slipping on the floor. Did she make it?" "She's alive," Mason said evenly. "Barely." Travis swallowed hard and looked at Lily, who stared back at him with a mixture of fear and mistrust. Travis shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, guilt flickering across his features. He had always been gentle with children, but tonight he seemed like he was crumbling. "I tried to check on everyone during the shift," he began, voice trembling. "But we were short-staffed. Corporate pulled 3 workers for another site, and the machines kept malfunctioning. I didn't see her leave the floor. I didn't realize she never came back from break." His voice cracked. "Her shift? It was supposed to end hours before she collapsed. 14 hours, Mason. 14. She should have gone home." Lily clung to Mason tighter, burying her face in his shirt. Mason stroked her back gently before meeting Travis's eyes. "Travis, you saw this coming. You told me last month the plant was pushing workers past safe limits." Travis inhaled sharply, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. "I did, but they said productivity targets were temporary. They said the labor board wouldn't notice." He looked away, ashamed. "I thought I could keep things together just like always, but this time I failed." Mason studied his friend. Travis was a man who had always tried to do the right thing, even when pressure crushed him. He was someone who had grown up in poverty, raised by a single father who worked 2 jobs, and Travis had vowed never to let anyone suffer the way his family had. Tonight, that vow lay in pieces at his feet. "We're going to fix this," Mason said, quietly but firmly. "But first, we focus on Hannah." Hours drifted into daybreak. The storm outside raged on, hammering the hospital windows. Lily refused to leave Hannah's side when she was finally moved into a private recovery room. Mason brought in a chair, positioning it near the bed, and settled Lily on his lap. Atlas curled beneath them like a silent guardian, his warm breath fogging against the tile floor. When Hannah finally stirred, Her lashes fluttering weakly, Mason leaned forward. Her eyes opened slowly, soft brown irises clouded with fatigue. She looked fragile, like a woman stretched thin by life and responsibility. Her hair, usually tied back neatly, spread loosely around her pillow, strands framing her pale face. Her lips were cracked, and faint lines of exhaustion etched her skin. "Lily," she whispered, voice rough as sandpaper. "Mommy!" Lily cried, scrambling from Mason's lap to clutch her mother's hand. Hannah's eyes filled with tears as she brushed her daughter's cheek with trembling fingers. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to worry you." Mason stepped back, letting the reunion breathe. As Hannah's gaze drifted toward him, something shifted in the air. Gratitude, fear, relief, all tangled together. "Sergeant Hale," she murmured. "Mason," he corrected softly. "Hannah, you scared us, but you're safe. The doctors say you'll recover." Her expression tightened, shame creeping in. I needed the hours. They cut shifts last month. Rent, groceries, Lily's school." Her voice frayed. "You don't owe me explanations," Mason replied. "Rest. That's what matters." That night, Mason stayed in the corridor outside her room, sitting on a stiff plastic chair, elbows on his knees. He didn't know why he stayed, only that leaving felt unthinkable. When the hall quieted to the soft hum of machines, Hannah spoke from inside the room. "You don't have to stay," she said softly, her voice carrying faintly through the cracked door. Mason stood and stepped inside. She was awake again, Lily asleep beside her, small fingers locked around her mother's wrist. "I know," he said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "But I want to." She studied him, this broad-shouldered Marine with tired eyes and a quiet sadness he tried to bury. "You look like someone who hasn't slept in days," Hannah said gently. Mason's lips twitched. "You're one to talk." She exhaled a small, weary laugh. "Life's been heavy." "Tell me," Mason said quietly. Hannah hesitated, then confessed. She spoke about years of scraping by, about working doubles while Lily slept in daycare hallways, about the terror of opening an empty fridge. Her voice trembled when she described the loneliness, doing everything alone, never having someone to lean on. Mason listened, feeling something inside him loosen. He spoke then, reluctantly at first, about the desert, about explosions that shook the sky, about faces of Marines he'd lost, about waking at night with his heart racing and Atlas nudging him back to reality. He told her about the guilt he carried, the pressure to always be strong for others. By the time dawn bled pale gold through the window, Mason realized something profound. He had said more to Hannah Carter in one night than he'd said to anyone in years. Hannah blinked sleepily. "Thank you, Mason, for finding my daughter, for being here." He met her gaze, warmth flickering in his chest. "I'm not going anywhere." But as he stood to stretch his aching back, a heavy responsibility settled on him. Silverpine's negligence had nearly cost a life, and tomorrow he would begin the paperwork. He would file a special report to Camp Whitford, triggering a military-affiliated labor safety audit. He would also contact the county labor board. An investigation would begin. He would make sure of it. For tonight, though, he stood at Hannah's bedside as she drifted to sleep, Lily curled against her. Atlas nudged Mason's knee with a soft whine as if sensing the shift in his heart. The storm outside was finally breaking, but Mason knew the real fight was just beginning. Late winter sunlight stretched in pale ribbons across the grounds of Camp Whitford, the military installation nestled against the snowy foothills of Aspen Ridge. The storm had finally loosened its grip on the valley, leaving behind banks of snow that glittered like crushed diamonds under the cold sun. Sergeant Mason Hale walked beside Hannah Carter and her daughter Lily as they made their way toward the administrative building that handled civilian military assistance requests. Hannah moved slowly, still recovering from days of physical collapse, but the color had returned to her cheeks. Her light brown hair, usually tied into a practical knot during work shifts, hung loosely today, brushing her shoulders with a softness that surprised Mason each time he looked her way. Her slender figure carried both weariness and new strength, as though survival itself had given her a second spine. Lily walked between them, bundled in a puffy blue coat donated by the base's outreach team, her small gloved hand clinging to Mason's. She had become his constant shadow over the past days, a child who had learned that monsters hid not under beds, but in real-world spaces where mothers collapsed unseen. And Atlas, the 5-year-old amber-furred German shepherd, padded firmly at Mason's side, tail down in calm vigilance. His posture was relaxed but alert, ears rotating constantly, absorbing every footstep, every echo, every shift of wind. Mason had always trusted the dog more than most people. The base was crowded today. Dozens of Marines, logistics officers, civilian contractors, and support staff moved between buildings. A few enlisted men nodded respectfully at Mason, a gesture reserved not only for rank, but for the quiet reputation he had earned as someone reliable and steady under pressure. The administrative lounge was warm and smelled faintly of old coffee. Behind the main desk sat Sergeant First Class Denise Ward, a tall, broad-shouldered African-American woman in her early 40s with close-cropped black hair and smooth, deep brown skin. She had an air of both command and compassion, her uniform crisp, her posture immaculate. Denise was the kind of NCO who could silence an entire room with a single raised eyebrow, but she greeted Hannah and Lily with a gentleness that spoke to years of working with struggling families. "You must be Hannah Carter," she said warmly, "and this brave little one must be Lily." Lily peeked out from behind Mason's leg. Denise smiled, dimples appearing. "We're going to make sure your mom gets all the help she needs, sweetheart." Hannah, leaning slightly on the counter, nodded. "Thank you. I've never needed help like this before." "Doesn't matter," Denise said firmly. "Strength isn't doing everything alone. Strength is knowing when to accept backup." Mason glanced at her, amused. "You giving me life advice again?" "Always," Denise replied dryly. "And you need it more than most." Their rapport made Hannah smile, a small but real expression that lit her tired features. They completed paperwork and met briefly with Lieutenant Owen Rusk, a logistics officer in his mid-30s with sandy blonde hair, tired blue eyes, and a clipped tone that suggested he lived more inside forms and procedures than outside them. He wasn't unkind, merely burnt out from years of balancing bureaucracy with the desperate needs of local civilians. His handshake was limp, his uniform immaculate, his expression the perpetual look of someone battling a stack of unfinished reports. After signing the final document, Mason guided Hannah and Lily toward the exit. The sky had turned a hazy silver, clouds thickening. Snowflakes drifted lazily at first, then faster. Mason glanced up, instinct prickling. "Weather's changing again," he murmured. "Let's get indoors before it worsens." But they didn't make it. The sirens hit first, an ear-piercing shriek that sliced through the air, followed by flashing red lights along the building walls. Automated speakers boomed. "Attention personnel, fire alarm triggered, evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." Hannah froze. Lily grabbed Mason's hand tighter. The hallway exploded with noise. Boots pounding, voices echoing, orders shouted. Marines moved in coordinated waves toward designated exits, but even organized evacuations created chaos for a child who had been traumatized less than a week earlier. "It's okay, Lily," Mason began, bending down. "This is just—" But the hallway shifted, people pressed past them, and when Lily saw her mother get swept a few steps away by the flow of bodies, panic seized her. "Mommy!" she cried, the same raw terror Mason had heard the night she collapsed on his porch. Hannah reached desperately toward her. "Lily, wait!" But the crowd was too dense, and Lily slipped free of Mason's grasp, fear overriding logic. She bolted down the side corridor, pushed open a maintenance door, and vanished into the swirling curtain of snow outside. "Lily!" Hannah screamed. Her face blanched, knees buckling. She collapsed to the floor, hands trembling uncontrollably as the memory of nearly losing her child resurfaced with brutal force. Mason grabbed her shoulders. "Hannah, look at me." She shook her head violently, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Not again! Not again! Please!" "Listen," Mason said, voice steady, authority anchoring her. "We're going to find her. Lily's smart. She won't go far." But Hannah's sobs only grew. "Mason, she's terrified of alarms. She told me last night she dreams of being alone in the snow. What if she's—" "Stop." Mason gripped her arms firmly. "I won't let anything happen to her, I swear it. Then he released her and turned toward the storm. His voice echoed across the courtyard. "Atlas, track!" Instantly, the German shepherd snapped into action. His ears shot forward, nose dropped to the ground, and he surged ahead, following invisible scent particles scattered through the cold air. Mason sprinted after him, his boots pounding through deepening snow. The base ground stretched wide, barracks, motor pools, supply sheds, and the storm was thickening quickly. Visibility shrank to a tunnel of white. Atlas moved with purpose, weaving through obstacles, his tail stiff, body low. Mason trusted the dog implicitly. "Good boy, Atlas, find her," he called. Atlas veered sharply left toward the motor pool lot. The area was empty, vehicles covered in frost. Beyond it, the old storage alley cut between two warehouses, dark, narrow, cold as a grave. Snow drifted thick inside it. Mason's stomach clenched. "Tell me she didn't go in there." But Atlas lunged through the alley entrance, barking sharply. Mason followed, heart slamming in his ribs. And then, "Mason!" A faint voice whimpered. He saw her. Tiny Lily Carter sat curled behind a steel dumpster, hugging her worn stuffed bear so tight the seams strained. Her small shoulders shook violently, her cheeks streaked with tears and snow. She looked utterly terrified. Mason dropped to his knees. "Lily, sweetheart, hey, I'm here." She stared at him with eyes wide and watery. I didn't see Mommy. Everyone was yelling. I thought—" Mason swept her into his arms before she could finish, pressing her against his chest to block the wind. She was freezing, trembling, breath coming in panicked gasps. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I've got you. I've got you." Atlas planted himself beside them, body angled against the wind, forming a barrier like a trained guardian. Footsteps crunched rapidly behind them. Hannah stumbled into the alley, hair wild, breath ragged. When she saw Mason holding Lily, her face crumpled. Oh God, Lily!" She fell to her knees beside them, pulling her daughter and Mason into a desperate embrace. Lily sobbed into her mother's chest. "I thought I lost you," Hannah whispered brokenly. Mason felt the words burn into him. Something deep and frightening shifted inside him, a realization, sudden and absolute. Somewhere between the storm, the hospital, and the fear of losing this child, these two had crossed an invisible threshold into his life. He needed them, more than he wanted to admit. He adjusted his hold, drawing them both close against his chest as Atlas leaned into his side. Snow fell around them like a curtain closing on a scene no one would forget. And in that moment, without a single declaration spoken aloud, the shape of a family began to form. A family none of them dared name yet. A family that felt terrifyingly real. Mason met Hannah's eyes over Lily's head, her tears, her relief, her undeniable trust. The weight of that look settled deep into his bones, and Mason knew nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The late winter sky over Aspen Ridge glowed in a soft, pearlescent haze, the kind of muted light that looked neither like dawn nor dusk, a tender in-between moment that felt suspended outside time. Snowflakes drifted lazily across the valley, settling on rooftops and pine branches, dusting the world in quiet white. The blizzard that had nearly torn everything apart now felt like a distant memory, replaced with a season of gentle healing. It had been 3 weeks since the investigation into silver pine manufacturing concluded. The county labor board, along with the military-affiliated safety auditors from Camp Whitford, delivered a damning report. Violations stretched back months. Overworked staff, unauthorized overtime, broken machine protocols, and supervisors forced to balance impossible quotas. Fines were issued, mandatory training implemented, and the company leadership reshuffled to prevent a repeat. Hannah Carter received an official apology letter from Silver Pine, but more importantly, she was reassigned to a light-duty administrative position, shorter hours, predictable shifts, and benefits she had never dreamed she'd be granted. Her new tasks mostly involved filing, scheduling, and maintaining supply logs. She took to the role quickly. Her attention to detail, once overlooked on the factory floor, became an asset. With stability finally returning to her life, something warmer, something quieter, began to grow. Mason Hale became a frequent presence at her small rental home on Maple Hollow Road. The house was a compact one-story with pale gray siding and a crooked porch step that wobbled if you put weight on the wrong board. Mason insisted on repairing it. Then he fixed the back door hinge, then the water heater, then the leaky faucet. Hannah teased him constantly for refusing to sit still, but he only shrugged and said fixing things kept him grounded. Lily adored him even more openly. She would run to the Jeep the moment she heard it approach, her tiny boots kicking up snow. She often carried Atlas's rope toy, which she presented to him like an offering to a great furry deity. Atlas, now undeniably Lily's guardian, treated the girl with reverent gentleness. Though he was a massive, muscular German shepherd trained for search and rescue, he allowed Lily to braid ribbons into the fur behind his ears. Somewhere in his proud canine heart, he forgave the indignity. Their routine became its own comfort. Mason would take Lily and Atlas on long walks through the lone pine forest trail, letting the girl crunch through snowbanks and chase Atlas's paw prints. Hannah would stand on the porch watching them disappear between the trees. Mason's tall figure walking steadily ahead, Atlas bounding like a blur of amber, Lily laughing in breathless bursts behind them. Life no longer felt like a battlefield for Hannah. For the first time in years, she slept without fear of the phone ringing with an emergency, or of bills stacking higher. And Mason, haunted for so long by desert sand, gunfire, and faces he could never forget, found something he never expected: quiet. Not silence, but peace. Still, neither he nor Hannah rushed their feelings. There were no dramatic declarations, no sweeping romance. What grew between them was steadier, born from shared hardship, trust earned in storms, and the fragile miracle of survival. Now, Camp Whitford was preparing for its annual Community Appreciation Ceremony, a gathering held to honor the locals who supported the base throughout the year. The event usually consisted of hot cocoa stands, a bonfire, speeches, and an award or two. But this year, the turnout was unusually large. Many had heard whispers of the soldier who found a child in a blizzard. Some had heard the fuller story: the mother who nearly died, the plant under investigation, and the Marine who refused to let a broken system swallow a family. The ceremony took place in the wide parade courtyard. Strings of warm lights crisscrossed overhead, casting soft golden illumination across the snow-dusted ground. Families huddled together in coats and scarves, children rolled snowballs, and service dogs sat obediently beside their handlers. Lily wore a purple winter coat with white fur trim. Her cheeks glowed pink from cold and excitement. Hannah wore a navy blue wool coat Mason had helped her pick out from a thrift store. She had refused anything expensive, but the coat suited her, elegant in a quiet, unassuming way. Mason stood near the stage, adjusting the microphone. He wore his formal Marine uniform, olive green jacket, nameplate polished, ribbons in neat rows. Under the lights, his angular face looked both resolute and strangely vulnerable, the faint scar along his jaw barely visible beneath trimmed stubble. Atlas sat beside him, alert and regal. The event coordinator, Chief Warrant Officer Ron Mercer, introduced Mason to the crowd. Mercer was a sturdy man in his late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a mustache thick enough to qualify as a winter accessory. Gruff in voice but warm in heart, he had been with the base for decades and was known for giving speeches that included both military discipline and dad jokes. "Our next speaker," Mercer announced, "is a man many of you know, Sergeant Mason Hale. He served 2 overseas tours, saved more lives than he'll admit, and recently reminded all of us what real courage looks like, not on the battlefield, but right here at home." Applause rippled across the courtyard. Mason inhaled slowly, stepping to the microphone. He looked out at the faces, military personnel, local workers, families, and then his gaze found Hannah and Lily. They stood near the front, hands clasped, their breath rising in soft white clouds. Hannah gave him a small nod. Lily waved enthusiastically. Mason began speaking. He didn't talk about war or medals. He didn't mention missions or losses. Instead, he told a simple story. "A few weeks ago," he said, "a little girl walked alone in a snowstorm trying to find her mother. She was 6 years old. She could have turned back. She could have given up. But she didn't. She kept walking because love told her to keep going." Soft murmurs drifted through the crowd. He continued, voice steady but thickening with emotion. "That little girl reminded me of something I had forgotten, that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's small and quiet and freezing cold and wearing a pink dress in the middle of a blizzard." Laughter rolled gently through the gathered crowd, warm and sympathetic. "And her mother," Mason said, turning his eyes to Hannah, is one of the strongest people I've ever met. Not because she never fell, but because she always got back up. He stepped back from the microphone, and then, before anyone could move, he walked off the stage. Atlas followed. The crowd parted instinctively as Mason approached Hannah and Lily, boots crunching softly in the snow. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with certainty, with purpose. When he reached them, he knelt on one knee. Gasps rose. Someone dropped a cup of cocoa. Lily squealed and clapped her mittened hands over her mouth. Hannah's breath hitched, her eyes widened, shimmering in the golden lights. Mason took her hand, small, warm, trembling. For years, he said softly, I didn't know what home meant. I didn't know if I'd ever feel anchored again. He looked at Lily, who was bouncing in place. But the night I found you two in the snow, I knew where I wanted to be. I knew who I wanted to be. His voice lowered, tender and full. Hannah, Lily, I'm asking, will you let me be a place you can return to? Will you let me be your home? Lily yelled, Mommy, say yes! Hannah covered her mouth with both hands as tears spilled freely. She nodded, again and again and again, before words finally broke through her sobs. Yes, Mason, yes. He rose to his feet and pulled both Hannah and Lily into his arms. The crowd erupted in applause. Mercer wiped his eyes discreetly. Atlas barked joyfully, circling them in excited loops, his amber fur glowing in the lights. Snow began to fall again, soft, gentle flakes drifting down like a blessing. And on that winter night in Aspen Ridge, a new family was born. Not from perfection, not from fairy tales, but from storms survived together, fears faced side by side, and the simple, unspoken truth that love often arrives in the most unexpected cold. In the quiet fall of snow over Aspen Ridge, we're reminded that miracles rarely arrive with thunder. Sometimes they come to us softly, through a lost child found, through a heart healed, or through the unexpected kindness of a stranger God places in our path. Life is full of storms, but it's also full of moments where grace breaks through the cold, moments that remind us we are never truly alone, never truly forgotten. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who might need a little light today. Leave a comment, join our community by subscribing, and help us spread stories that lift the soul. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and bless everyone who listens with warmth, courage, and hope. Until the next story, stay safe, stay kind, and trust that even in the hardest seasons, there's always a little miracle on the way.